everyone, and welcome to Dissonant Dialogues. I'm Claire Barber, and you'll notice that we're missing a familiar face. My co-host Emily is not here today, but we are replaced with the lovely Robin Hahn, who is a fellow opera singer. And Robin, do you want to introduce yourself, give some background to the audience?
Hi, everybody. I am a soprano. I'm a lyric soprano based in Vancouver, Canada, singing opera and telling fun stories. Also, am a stage director of opera, and I am an advocate for the disability community within the operatic world. So I'm really excited to be here. And
that's wonderful. Yeah, I came across your Instagram popped up on my algorithm, and I'm so grateful for that. You know, I get a lot of music content. I get a lot of disability content. It's not often that the two of them get to intersect. And for the audience who will have already seen our previous episode, we decided as we're wrapping up the season that Emily and I will each pick a guest for a topic of our choice. So Emily's was on music education, and I wanted to talk about disability, and it kind of felt like your account fell into my lap at the right time, where I was just, everything I saw, exactly, I was relating to it so much, and it felt so comfortable. As we were talking before getting started, that this may seem really niche, some of these experiences, but disability, most people, if you live long enough, you will deal with disability. You can become disabled at any time. And there are no guarantees in life. And to exclude such a massive community of potential singers and musicians from this industry because it's so oversaturated and because so many of us are treated as disposable, you're missing out on a valuable perspective and valuable storytellers. And so that's something I really want to bring attention to, particularly now as we are slowly sort of emerging from, you know, a massive global pandemic, and a lot of people who didn't have chronic health conditions before may be suffering from those now. I'm sure in the music world, because people, you catch everything everyone has when you're in school and, you know, doing shows.
Absolutely. You're expectorating on people's faces at high velocity. What else was going to happen?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think also within the operatic world in particular, there's such a pressure to appear non-disabled in the opera world because it is a world so focused on your body being your instrument.
Right.
We just don't speak a lot of disability and chronic illness, despite the fact that it's, you know, the percentages of people with disability or chronic illness in any given space is enormous. I also think that because we don't talk about it, people also don't imagine themselves as disabled when they could, because I think we also imagine like disability as a little bit of a roller coaster measuring stick. You have to be this disabled to ride this ride. And that's just not true. There are no definitions of disability anywhere in any dictionary that I have looked in, and boy have I looked at them, that require a certain level of disability to be disabled. Right. It really just means that for one reason or another, in some capacity or another, a person is not capable of fully participating in their world.
Right. Yeah.
And that is a really, really broad definition.
Absolutely.
And keeping that definition broad is in and of itself helpful for people to find community, to understand themselves, and to recognize that it is also not a moral failing to be unable to do the thing that maybe your next door neighbor can do, or maybe that soprano next door can do.
Right. Or an intellectual failing too. Yeah.
Exactly. There is no failure in disability, despite the fact that we work in this industry that does have this pressure towards apparent perfection.
That's something I know that this was something I've discussed with my co-host before in earlier episodes, but I talked about the ultimate like paradox of our industry is that we are artists operating in a field that is based on tradition. When you're in the classical music world, there are so many traditions and so many standards that we have towards what artistic excellence looks like. It's higher than what most people can't do this. You know, it takes incredible skills, not all of which I possess, not all of which anyone possesses when it comes to the whole package. And because there is such a stark definition of what is appropriate and correct, but because it's art, it's subjective. So there's no ceiling, which means you can always be better, but you can never be good. So all you're going to ever get is the criticism. And that endless ceiling is exhausting. And that's amplified so much when you have health issues.
Oh, you've put it so beautifully. I've never heard it put so succinctly and so beautifully. And that it's so true. It's so true. We have this endless pressure. There is no way to ever be quote unquote good enough.
Yeah.
And within that system, we then also have education systems that that will never tell you this explicitly, but absolutely every education system that I have set foot in has implicitly told their singers that if you don't have a career that looks like this, and then this, and then this, and then world famous opera singer,
right,
that is because you suck at opera.
Yeah, absolutely.
It tells you that is true, which again, nobody has ever said that to me in so many words, but the systems are built to teach that to us. And of course, when you live in a disabled body, even if, you know, a disabled singer were the best singer in the world, that may not be possible.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
I don't know if you have seen Phantoms of the Opera on YouTube. A phenomenal.
No, I don't think so.
Operatic essayist who released a video that, of course, appealed to me immensely because, well, no one is really capable of diagnosing anyone with anything that isn't this person's doctor. The central thesis of this video was that it is possible that Maria Callas may have been hypermobile and may have had
that makes so much sense.
I know.
Yeah.
And like
totally,
she literally was one of the best to ever live. And she didn't end up having a normal career.
Yeah.
Even like, she was one of the most famous, biggest singers in the world. She was in the tabloids. She was a true superstar. And yet multiple times had to stop singing. I had to, like, for health reasons.
Yeah.
Even her career.
Yeah.
Was not like.
And she was divisive.
Yeah.
Like even in her, I think that's one thing is like, we think of her as one of the greats, but you'll still meet people today who are like, oh, she's shrill, I don't like her. And back then, people tore her apart. And I think there was a rawness to her expressiveness. So I think we need to remember that, like, you can be on top of the world in this career. And there are still going to be people you can have. That's what's so crazy is you can have a room full of 12 different people. They can all be equally qualified. They can all have the same degrees. They can all be masters in their art at the same subject. And all of them can have a different opinion of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But all of them are going to believe that no one else should contradict their opinions.
Absolutely. They will believe, not only will they believe totally different things, but they will believe that they are solely right. As though it were an objective truth when we're in a subjective industry. Yeah. So I just really love and feel really passionately about you know, spreading the word that don't have to have the career that your educational institution implies that you must to be successful. Even speaking to maybe non-disabled folks or pre-disabled folks, you may have all of the capabilities to do that. You may have, and sort of imagine a world where this is laid out to you on a silver platter. It is also entirely possible that people could just not want that. Yeah. And it's very true. It's still entirely possible to then have a successful career. Yeah. And I feel really strongly about yelling that to the rooftops. I completely agree. And you know what's frustrating is that the industry looks different now. That traditional career was always hard to obtain. It is more unattainable probably than ever before. But at the same time, I think opera and classical music in general are evolving in really, really interesting and exciting ways when you know where to look. And we're seeing sort of the old guard have a reaction, I think, of fear to that and really sort of clinging on to a lot of these problematic traditions and sort of digging in their heels. And I think that is what is causing people that I know to either create their own opportunities or to walk away altogether. And I was that person. I've talked about it before too. I was the person who wanted the traditional opera career. Like I
I went to school with a lot of people who didn't envision that for themselves, who did envision, they wanted to learn classical technique, but they wanted to go into, independent music recording, or, or they wanted to do some blend of teaching, or they wanted to do more experimental programs in theater companies or TV. And I was one of the few people who, from, in my very small class, because music schools are small, who, from the get-go was like, no, I want the traditional operatic soloist, A1 opera house company. Like, this is what I want. I couldn't see any other path. And so there was a certain grief that took place when I realized that path, which was already really hard to obtain, is now just completely out of my grasp. And the fact that while your professors and your coaches can barely prepare you for the traditional pathway, because it has changed from when they were in the game, oftentimes, they also cannot and do not prepare you for anything remotely divergent.
Absolutely. I think disability narratives in media and in, the public eye are still fairly limited. Yes, have they improved? Of course. Yeah. And we love and we celebrate improvement and wonderful and warm disability representation that we've seen on Bridgerton and Doctor Who this year. But we still have these narratives when it comes to disability that have been internalized by everyone, that say that there are two ways to be disabled or to feel about being disabled. One is that your life is sad now.
Yeah.
And two, that you are now an inspiration.
Yes.
Many people, the reality of becoming disabled is that there is a grief period for the life that you envisioned yourself, that for your future life. There is a grief for your past self. But the thing with grief is that hopefully grief is temporary, and that we learn to live. Yeah. And that our life is not an inspiration. No. And although we can do inspirational things like any other person. Sometimes going out with your mobility aid for the first time is a very courageous act. That can be inspiring. For sure. But you know what's not inspiring? Like going to get the mail. Yeah. My life is not an inspiration naturally. But that is it is an emotional process that we go through. And again, in such an industry, there's no real space for that. Your career is considered over before it began. Yes. If you are in that space. Yes. And again, that's just that is unfair and untrue, because this is art. There is no one way to make art. No. Hello? There has never been one way to make art. And this is not just art, but it is an art form that is almost singular in its inability to exist without modern current interaction, despite the fact that a lot of its source material is very old. You can argue that Traviata sort of ceases existing if it's in a closed score. Yes. As an art piece, it's not really its full self if the score is closed and on a shelf. It must be consumed, it must be redone to exist again. We interact with it new every time that we interact with it at all. Wow. So the way that
you put that really well.
The way that we interact with it as whole humans is part of that art form. So to expect that we do it the same way every time, that every artist do it exactly the same way, that their career look the same, and that every production then ends up feeling the same is not really, like, it's sort of, to me, it's a limited imagination of what even those traditional operas can be. Because it doesn't matter that Traviata was written in the 1800s. When
at the time it was current, I think we have to realize that at one point these were new, innovative, and sometimes very controversial works.
And you can make it new and human every time you make it. So the fullness of our human experience and the full range of human experience is and should be part of that.
Yeah, Absolutely. Oh, that's so well said. Yeah, I love that. We've talked for quite a bit, but I do want, if you want to share,
Yep.
maybe give us some background on how you became disabled or aware of your disability and what that journey was for you.
Absolutely. So I'm very open about this on the internet, so I am happy to. I was actually, for a long time in my friend group, I sort of identified as the quote unquote healthy one.
Mm,
That was an identity marker for me because my closest friends were chronically ill and disabled. I was the
wow.
one that pushed the wheelchairs on days out. I was that was an identity marker for me, despite the fact that, of course, like so many people with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which for listeners who may have never heard of it, is a genetic connective tissue disorder. That means that I had it from birth, though it, for many people, and for myself included, the symptoms are exacerbated over time. So there can be things like joint damage. Because it is a connective tissue disorder, your connective tissue is in all of you, everywhere, all at once.
Yeah.
Everything, everywhere, all at once. I just watched that movie. It's so good. So it can affect a wide variety of systems in a wide variety of ways at a wide variety of times in a person's life. So when I identified as the quote unquote healthy one, I just knew I had these like tricks that my joints could do. I knew I was bendy and that could be a special skill I could put at the bottom of my resume, you know?
Yeah.
I knew that my body, as I became an adult and as I started my career, I knew that my body was unusual, but I just sort of, that's what I tacked it off. I shrugged it off as I said, my body's a little bit weird, but again, I am the healthy one. Why would I imagine anything differently? Even if I'm starting to experience really strange symptoms, like I didn't think of them as symptoms. I just thought it was like, oh, it's a thing my body does. That's weird.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You get used to it because the body is
Yes.
a closed system, right? Like I don't know
Right.
what your body feels like. You don't know what my body, like we don't have a frame of reference internally for what is normal.
Yes.
Certainly if normal changes very slowly over time, as it did for me.
Yes, for sure.
So I went to Germany and I started pursuing that career because some people I found, particularly in Europe, assumed that as a Canadian I could work in the US. Untrue.
Oh,
So, and yeah, you as you might imagine, even the biggest houses in Canada, the job market vanishingly small.
oh,
So
yeah.
it is just sort of it is one of the steps for a Canadian opera singer to do to go somewhere else
Right.
on a young person's visa. So I went to Germany on a youth mobility visa. I spoke German from a very young age. It seemed like a perfect fit. And I started doing auditions, and I lived out of a suitcase, and I dragged everything I owned in a giant suitcase over the cobblestones everywhere.
Wow.
And it became slowly quite clear that my body couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I remember very vividly chopping some vegetables and in a kitchen in Frankfurt and not being able to be upright. So then I sat down in the kitchen, and that wasn't enough. So then I lay down on the kitchen floor, and I looked up at the counter, and I saw the tip of the knife with which I had been chopping vegetables sticking over the edge of the counter over my head. It didn't look precarious, but nevertheless, there was a blade over my head.
Yes.
And I had no capability to stand up and move it.
Wow.
And I went, this is not right at all.
Yeah.
Something is up. And of course, this is opera, and in opera, your body is your instrument.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, well, this is my job.
Yes.
I need to find something out about what's going on. But of course, I am in Germany on a Canadian youth mobility visa. What's my medical coverage? If I break a leg, I can go to the hospital. That's it. So I started, scouring the internet. Now I am a nerd, and it also turns out I was very recently diagnosed with ADHD. So I also hyper focused on this very deeply. And I read medical journal after medical journal. And I had quite early on come across the diagnostic criteria for hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, the most common type. The only type where we haven't found one gene for all, so it has a diagnostic criteria list. And I found it, but I didn't know half the words on it because everything was in, you know, medical ease. I didn't know what pyogenic papules of the heel were. So I assumed that because a doctor had never said those things to me, that I didn't have them.
Right.
So I kept going. I kept pushing myself. My body is saying absolutely not. But I'm still in Germany, and I'm still trying to work, and I'm still touring, and all of that stuff. And then I found I don't know how I did it, some EDS YouTube video on the internet that broke down all of the medical ease in that diagnostic criteria list.
Wow.
And what it meant. So once again, I was chopping vegetables in my kitchen when I was like, oh, and discovered that I, like, down the list 100%. I look like the textbook definition of hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome as defined by that diagnostic criteria.
Right.
And I went, oh, okay. But by this point, I had some questions for like a long time, but I'd asked some doctors in the past, including my then GP, who had said that, well, that sounds like something, but I don't have time to look it up. So this has been about 10 years of weirdness in my body, getting to the point where I just eventually gave up and looked it up. So I went to a new GP when I came back to Canada, and I waved the diagnostic criteria in front of him. He also Googled isogenic papules of the heel in front of me because he had no idea what those were either. And went, yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
Sent me to a rheumatologist, and the rest is history.
Right.
With EDS, as anyone with EDS would know, tend to come a load of other diagnoses. I had a minor heart surgery, not this January, but the January before. Oof. Minor heart surgery is a thing that exists, by the way.
Yeah.
It sounds like
you learn
it's not a
stuff.
thing. Yes, definitely. Like, I was in the hospital for 4 hours. I got back the same day. Minor heart surgery. After the diagnosis, and as my body's symptoms progressed, it just became clear that being in Germany and pursuing the career that way was just not a thing that my body could handle.
Yeah.
It's like that type of living out of a suitcase, of carrying everything that you own on your back, of having to scrounge and save between auditions, because going from audition location to audition location is expensive. So therefore you try to get the cheapest version possible. So therefore you're on a long haul bus for 10 hours.
Yeah. Probably not eating as healthy as you should be.
Exactly. Yeah. My body couldn't take doing that in the way that my pocketbook could. It was not possible.
Yeah.
So I moved back to Canada, and I built a sort of more, what I now sort of call a more modular career.
Yeah.
That means that I just do less traveling. I direct operas now. I became a director of opera entirely by accident. I first directed my first opera almost 15 years ago. We were getting ready to begin staging, and the director bailed. And it was a very small opera.
Yeah.
And then I said, I have ballet history and I used to choreograph. Like, I could try.
Wow.
So I discovered that I loved doing that too. So I do that as well as perform. I consult with arts groups about disability and about ways to make their work more accessible as well. And I teach online entirely, which is more accessible for disabled singers. So about half my studio is disabled singers. It's also really helpful that I can teach from here, and my bed is over here.
Yes.
My commute is amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do all of those things, and I am an artist. That is what I do. But what I did was I essentially I decided what about this career was important to me. Because it turned out I love opera, but I'm not an opera singer just because I love singing.
Right.
I'm an opera singer because I love storytelling. And as a child, I started in ballet, as I said. I then went to theater and film. I then did a musical theater summer camp and started to take voice lessons then because I wanted to get into the musical theater summer camp. And then I never stopped. So I started doing musical theater. And now, and then I just looked around and I was like, I guess I sing opera now. That happened to me. So I came to opera by accident, but it is, you know, my passion and my love.
Yes.
But I came to it through storytelling.
Right.
So because I distilled what it was that I needed to do as an artist, what I felt compelled to do as an artist, I was able to create a career that I could build for myself that is just built more accessibly for me. Because I just, that whole traveling thing, it ain't it. It ain't it for me.
No,
My body needs rest, man.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that's how I got to where I was. About 10 years ago, I co-founded Opera Mariposa, which is Canada's first or only disability-led and run opera company. But that was, I co-founded that at the time when I thought I was the healthy one.
Interesting.
It was for my a woman I call my forever partner in operatic crime, Jacqueline Coe. Interestingly, I was born with what became my disability, but she wasn't. She has myalgic encephalomyelitis, which some people might know of as ME or CFS. Yes. And she essentially became very chronically ill and disabled with this by her like 6th voice lesson when she was like 10. So she throughout singing and becoming an opera singer always knew that this wasn't for her.
Right.
Like this career that we imagine was not for her. So together we conceived Opera Mariposa as a place where the rehearsal schedule might be a little more accessible because she was not able to do 6-hour rehearsals every day back to back. Not possible.
Yeah.
We created some wonderful productions and I'm very, very proud of it. But even before I realized that, oh, by the way, guess who's disabled too? Oh, look, does that mean that everybody here is disabled? Oh, wow. Well, that's an interesting thing for us to explore. So we were making cool opera at the beginning without knowing that this was where we would be. And but I'm so proud to have been a part of it and of the cool stuff that we've created. There are resources online that the general manager, Stephanie Coe, has created on the website about creating more COVID safer productions. And it's been a wild, wonderful ride.
That's so exciting. And I want to talk more about Opera Mariposa. I'm getting like major jealousy because now I want to move to, I mean, there are a lot of reasons to want to move to Canada.
Right.
I'm sure everywhere has their problems, but yeah, that sounds like such a wonderful thing. And it's kind of ironic because that is sort of an idea that I came up with on my own here too. Amazing. And so it just felt really like serendipitous that like the fate saw fit to bring me your account and actually ask somebody like, how is this even done? Before we get into that, I was just going to share a bit of my own disability story.
Please do.
Yes, that is common knowledge, but I haven't really gotten into it on an episode before. And so, yes, my primary diagnoses, which are kind of always in flux and up in the air, are POTS, Ehlers Danlos, and long COVID, all of which kind of do a different version of the same thing. Everyone knew that I was weak as a kid, so I did not have the reputation of being a healthy one. I was weak. I had a lot of sensory issues. I felt a lot of pain with physical exercise. I was not an active kid. You hear the other way around. You oftentimes hear Ehlers-Danlos people being like, oh, I was a ballerina, I was a gymnast. I remember I hated the sensations of all of that. My youngest sister has some degree of hypermobility. She's a ballet dancer, just graduated from the University of Utah with her ballet degree. So there's something there, but I did not have like the reputation of being healthy. I remember I used to get a lot of colds. I used to, be sick all the time. And I was kind of treated like I was dramatic or, a wimp, I guess.
Yep.
Yeah, that's how it goes. And I was also, I grew up in Texas. I was homeschooled. Right. And I think just the fact that I was around people who saw me close up every day. So as I was getting ready to go to college, my high school teacher was the head of the opera department at UNT at the time, Jeffrey Snyder, and he was wonderful. I was having one of my last lessons before moving away to Chicago for college. And it's Texas, it's 1,000,000 degrees, even in an air-conditioned campus. They don't climate control as meticulously during the summer. And his office is just one big window.
Gotcha.
So I was sitting in there and I was singing through something. I started to feel really dizzy. It takes a lot for me to call attention to needing something. Like I'm always going to downplay. So if I say like, I need to sit for a second, then like, I probably should be on the ground.
Right. Same. So, you get used to it, right? Like if you are always in chronic pain and you are always a little bit dizzy, it's not of note. It's just not important.
What do you mean? Other people don't feel like they're on a ship all the time.
I know. What are you talking about? You don't spend most of your time at least a little bit dizzy and nauseated? What?
Your vision doesn't go black every time you move?
Bizarre. Your Fitbit doesn't tell you to like calm down and stop freaking out at random times just because you stood up 30 seconds ago? Oh, sorry.
Good. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So relatable. Yeah, so I asked to sit down, and I think he could see that I was kind of like going in and out. And he's like, do you want to go get some water? There's a fountain down the hall. So I walked out to grab water, and I started to feel extremely nauseous. I thought I was going to be sick. The bathroom door was right there. So I went in the bathroom. I don't entirely remember what happened at that point. I know that I didn't get sick, but I wanted to. And at a certain point, it kind of dawned on me that like, I hadn't told him where I went, and I needed to I didn't know how much time had passed. So I know at some point I got up off the floor and I went back to the water fountain. And the next thing I know that I crawled onto the ground. I know that I did not make that decision. That was not a conscious thought. So, I had these episodes of, what I've now come to know as pre-syncope. And I'm very grateful that every time I have lost consciousness, it has come with this episode that somewhere in my body, I know to crawl onto the ground before I just drop.
Same. And I have never, that's a lie. I have very rarely fainted while still vertical.
Yes, exactly.
I have enough warning. To be horizontal first, which is great.
They come on slow. All I knew is that, my teacher is this baritone man, and I can see like a shadow looming over me. I open my eyes and I just hear, oh, you're on the floor. And so eventually we got me back up, and he's like, it's policy during the school year for me to call an ambulance if this happens, but you're not a college student and it's summer. Like, what do you want me to do? I called my sister. She had to drive me home. We went to the ER. I'm sure you know how ER visits work when you're first figuring this out. They're like, oh, you were dehydrated maybe.
Yeah, you look fine now. Great.
And I had a raging migraine. And then these episodes continued throughout the summer. They put me on a heart monitor for the entirety of the rest of the summer. When the results were back, they were like, okay, well, your heart rate is really fast and it spikes randomly, including in the middle of the night with no reported activity, because it was one of those where you have to like press buttons to say what you're doing. And they're like, but anyway, I guess that's just your body.
The way they'll be like, I guess that's normal for you. And you're like, what I'm literally trying to tell you is that it does not feel normal.
They literally describe the diagnostic criteria, or a good chunk of it, for POTS. And then
I guess that's fine then.
Yeah, right. And then I moved to college, and in college, I'm at a city campus. A lot of college students, I figured I could get my appointments done when I was home on breaks. So I didn't get a new primary care physician. Well, I started getting sinus infections every 2 weeks on the dot. So where would I go? yeah, I had to go to the like urgent care in downtown Chicago where they have bigger things to deal with.
Cool, you're not dying.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. After basically almost constantly being on antibiotics, I went back in with the same symptoms, and they were like, we can't give you any more antibiotics. You've been on too many rounds. They tested me for strep, but they didn't test me for anything else. And they're like, you're just gonna have to wait this one out. And I was like, okay, well, that's not pleasant, but okay. And I went back. Weeks go by. I'm getting sicker and sicker, which again, when your body is your instrument, how do you function? We're like halfway through the semester. I was running fevers on and off. I was going to class wrapped in a quilt. I finally called my mom and I was like, I'm dying. You got to come get me. And it turns out I had mono that was not diagnosed. And at this point, I'd been walking around with a shot immune system. So it developed into bronchitis and a sinus infection finally on top of all of that. I had to go on steroids. And
I literally, because all of our medical stuff is just like one long story, right? It all becomes a blur. I literally forgot until this moment that I also have a mono story. Literally,
really?
just for it's on YouTube. Like I made a whole dramatic video about it because it was a big thing for me. I forgot.
Was that like before or after you got diagnosed?
Before my diagnosis.
Okay. Yeah.
So I just remembered it because what you're describing of like walking around like that, interacting with people, like
it doesn't feel real.
Yeah. And now, living in a pandemic age.
Yes.
It feels
really never.
Never. Absolutely not. Like you go, oh my God, is that a thing that I really did?
Yeah.
I cannot believe I did that. Yeah.
But would anyone accommodate? Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, you can't, but it's like, you can't miss. You cannot miss.
I conducted a concert like that with full on mono for 4 months. For 4 months.
That's because eventually they withdrew me from about half my classes. I was obviously, my grades were tanking because I was not able to physically get up. I was going to bed on Thursday and waking up on Saturdays sometimes. Like I'm sure that I must have gotten up, but I have no memory of it. So I was sleeping like through the entire weekend. I was losing weight. And I had no social life, no energy. All my roommates dropped out. So I was like, which is nice, but also I was quite isolated. So yeah, my voice started to drop and everyone was like, okay, is this mezzo time or are you just still sick?
Mine literally was happening as I turned from a coloratura into a lyric.
Oh,
like at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, people were like, are you ill? Or is this the fuck?
Who knows?
I literally became a lyric in the middle of rehearsals for Così fan tutte, and the conductor just sort of looked at me like I'd grown an extra head in the middle of a rehearsal because suddenly I was louder than the Fiordiligi, but we were way too far in. We were like, okay,
oops,
what do we
gonna have to power through.
Okay.
Don't you love that? Don't you love that we have an instrument that we can't take apart and look at what's going on in all of it until we're dead?
I know, right? Like we spend all of this time working on the coordination of these itty bitty little muscles doing these little itty bitty things, and we can never see them. We never really know what they're up to. We never really know what their like changes are, except by sound and sensation alone. I just want eyeballs in there.
Yes,
I just want to see it. Sorry.
It's
so relatable.
Completely relatable. Yeah. By the time I got to my second semester, I realized that my energy never came back. That even though like the congestion and stuff, I coughed for about a year, but even when those symptoms went away, I was still oversleeping, unable to get out of bed. And I just remember the mornings when like I could barely move my finger to turn my alarm off and just thinking like, I'm not sick. Why can't I move? Why can't I get out of bed? I must just be being lazy. And let me just tell anyone who's listening, when you have a sensation that you cannot get out of bed, there is no version of laziness that feels like that. None at all. You've been fed lies.
I have a hot take that laziness may not exist.
I agree with you. I think there is no laziness and just challenges.
Yes. Like I have never seen someone talking about being lazy that didn't have some form of a legitimate reason. And like, yes, you can be avoiding something because you don't like it, but you can also be avoiding something because your body is telling you no because you have no mental capacity for it. Like ask me how I know as a person with ADHD.
Yeah, sensory overload, overstimulation.
Exactly. Yeah. Like there are a lot, and like yes, sure, there are different degrees of it, but I also don't want to probably because I'm just not feeling great today as well.
Your body is trying to send you a signal that it doesn't like something. And if you live in chronic pain, your nervous system is fried. So you can't receive those signals clearly, which means that all you know is you don't like something. I mean, how many people do I know with celiac or MCAS who are just labeled picky eaters?
Oh, absolutely. So true.
I felt so hopeless and so defeated. Eventually, I had to sit down with my dean and plan an extra year for my degree so I could take things a little bit slower. Unfortunately, because music schools make everything 0 and 1 credit, and you need to have a certain number of credits to maintain scholarship and full-time. It kind of was a losing game because then I would have to add in other classes in order to maintain my scholarship so that I would have enough credit hours, because things like opera and choir are required 0 credit courses that you do 4 days a week. I got through my degree with a chip on my shoulder and by sheer willpower alone, and support from my now husband, who I started dating at the end of my freshman year, who's also a baritone and
awesome
in the same program. And so he's somebody who has been along with me for this ride. And I think it's when you become visibly disabled or tangibly disabled and you weren't perceived that way growing up, I think family, particularly when they're far away, have a really, really hard time accepting and internalizing what accommodations you need.
There's a resistance to it. Also, like, years of internalized ableism is going to affect them. Even the warmest, most supportive people, like they don't want you to be disabled. So if you don't use the cane, that makes you not disabled, right?
Right.
For me, EDS clearly came at least partially from my mom's side. I am a sperm bank baby, and all of my sperm donor half siblings are very hypermobile, but usually asymptomatic. So there may have been an exacerbating factor of hypermobility from my sperm donor side. But because I was living for 10 years with like weird things happening to my body that were genetic, because like the random traveling body pain that I had since from the age of 16, my mom told me was normal.
Yes, my mom too. I am so sure that my mom also has it. And I keep telling her, like, look into this. But I do keep telling her, I'm like, 100% you need to look into this. I told my mom, and I can say this without offending her because she laughed at it in the moment, but I told her, I was like, you have normal person syndrome. You seem to have this unconsciously held belief that you are, I'm sure you would never say it like this, the default person. And Absolutely. So therefore, if I complain of something that you relate to, whether it was my clinical anxiety that I needed to be medicated for, or my migraines or anything like that, and you relate to it, you say, oh, that's normal. Everybody feels that way. Instead of saying, oh, I feel that way too. Maybe there's something here for both of us. So I think there's just a little bit of a disconnect that a lot of people have, where, like you're saying, your body's a closed system. You don't know what other people, you don't know what normal is. You kind of assume that everybody feels the way that you do. But exactly. As a kid who was looking for a certain amount of guidance or reassurance, I think it did, obviously she didn't intend to inflict that on me, but it did like create this like guilt feedback,
Absolutely. Same. And like my mom did eventually get as much of a diagnosis as her rheumatologist was willing to, given that she didn't meet all of the all of the criteria. The Baton score, for people listening, is a hypermobility test. After my mom got that, she apologized to me.
Wow.
And because she's like, I had no idea that this was unusual, and I know that made it harder for you to find your answer. Oh, I know.
I'm gonna cry.
I know. And she cried a lot too. But like, and then she she then tried to communicate with her siblings.
Yeah.
But my mom is an immigrant from Austria, from middle of nowhere, dead center in the center of Europe, and is, you know, in her mid-60s, and so are her brothers. Can you imagine how receptive they may or may not have been? As like, they're wonderful people, but like, after, like, depending on your experiences, depending on your cultural biases.
Yes, exactly.
It may be harder to accept.
You don't have to like it. It's still true.
It's just true.
Yeah.
It's just a fact.
Yeah.
So because we are a closed system, if you look, quote unquote, healthy on the outside, people assume, and the person looking at you also looks, quote unquote, healthy on the outside and feels healthy-ish on the inside, they will assume that you do too.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just not how it works.
If you live your life looking around at everyone else doing things that you couldn't possibly do, scheduling all these extra things. I looked around at everyone I knew was doing summer programs and working while in school. And I just kept wondering, how is everybody managing this?
Yeah.
Then that's your sign that something about you is different, and that's okay. That is okay. I spent my second year really trying to repair my reputation and be known as reliable. It is so impossible to find time, even though I now had doctors in Chicago. It was so impossible to find time slots, and most doctors' offices are closed on Fridays. And you're in school, music school, from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. unless it's tech week, and then you maybe get home at midnight. And
if you're lucky.
Exactly. I did manage to, at least with certain faculty, become known as extremely reliable. I also made a point of oversharing my medical history, because I didn't have a diagnosis and I needed to create sympathy. And then you have to play these games of like, you've got to look put together enough to be trusted with solo opportunities and attention, but you can't look so healthy that nobody believes you. I'm like sure
the balancing act of like, I need to look exactly the correct amount of sick.
Exactly.
What is the correct amount of sick? Please.
Right. And then when I'm there, I need to perform so well that they're not worried about my absences.
In one of my YouTube videos, where I spoke with Jackie, whom I spoke about earlier, my forever partner in operatic crime, about, you know, our lives as disabled opera singers and the way that our careers have differed because we came to disability at different points in our career, and obviously, and we also have different disabilities and different needs.
Yes.
But what we did talk about is that in our experience, it seems to be that disabled opera singers work extra hard to be extra reliable, to compensate for assumptions people make about your unreliability.
Yeah.
So
or
Jackie
absences.
Right. So Jackie and I are like fairly well understood in our area as being the sopranos you can call who can learn things quick.
Yes. Yeah.
We became those people because we had to. Because it is a way to sort of head off at the pass.
Yes.
The assumption that your illness means that I may not be able to rely on you being there and being effective.
Absolutely.
Which is frustrating, but true. I've not met a disabled opera person who doesn't work extra hard. Yeah.
And I was not somebody for whom everything came naturally. I struggled in theory. I struggled with so many things. And so it's not like, you know, it's not magic for anyone, but I had to develop all these little extra tricks, and then I had to be seen doing them. I had to make sure that I was seen in the hallway, buried in my headphone. I was seen everywhere, so people knew that I was working. I finally figured out that I had POTS after going to doctor after doctor after doctor. When a friend was diagnosed, I wanted to be more supportive to her. So I looked up the criteria because I was like, what is POTS? And I went through the list and I was like, oh, just like you said with Ehlers Danlos, it was one after the other after the other. And I was like, I have 100% of these.
Yeah.
And then it was summer before my 5th year of school. I went to a cardiologist who told me, I don't really believe in that. And I was like, okay, who in your building does? And he's like, well, there's this other cardiologist, but like, I wouldn't really refer you. And I said, refer me to him. And he's like, okay, if it's just to rule it out, we'll do that. He took one look at me. He did one stress test. sent me home with a heart monitor for 24 hours and was like, yes, you've got POTS.
I didn't even talk about my first rheumatologist because I went through the system twice. There was a sort of clerical error and I got referred twice by my GP. The first one was like, yeah, you're totally fit all these symptoms, but why would you want this diagnosis? There's nothing I can do to help you.
That's what I've gotten too. And that makes sense, because you need accommodations for your workplace. And if you don't have a name for what your systems are, nobody can help you.
Exactly. And I was like, also, I know that there are like very like unlikely, like for someone I felt like me who but you know, there are possible like very serious complications. I would like to be monitored, please.
Right.
And what I neglected to mention was that I had flown in from Helsinki the day before. So I was extremely jet lagged, and I had told him this at the beginning of the appointment. So when I was trying to like justify why I would ever want a diagnosis, he was like, oh, by the way, rheumatologist, just in case people listening don't know, this is a specialist in inflammation. He has also met me for 20 minutes. At this point, he then says to me, have you ever considered that maybe you are just depressed? What do you mean, quote unquote, just depressed? That's an enormous thing. So like not just anything. Second of all, if you knew me at all, you would know that is absolutely untrue of me. I am obnoxiously sunny. It's actually it's kind of annoying, really, how sunny I am. And third of all, I have told you I am jet lagged. And fourth, now I am mad at you.
Yes.
I said it to his face, and then he apologized.
Good for you, though.
And I left, and I never saw him again. And I was already in the system for the other rheumatologist who was great. This is very common too for people searching for a diagnosis for vague
medical gaslighting, particularly if you're female-bodied.
Yes, if they look at you and think you're cute. Like just like not you know, like in a creepy way, but like you're small and adorable. You get treated in this very particular like infantilizing way. And I am 5'1" if I stretch, right? Like I'm little.
No, I had a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, and panic disorder since I was 15. Right. So having that on my chart meant that I had to deal with a lot of medical gaslighting.
Absolutely. I'm very lucky, honestly, not just to not struggle with that, but because I am so obnoxiously sunny that anyone who meets me for 10 minutes, unless I am super jet lagged, I guess, can tell. So I that is one barrier I never faced because I have been very, very lucky with my mental health.
Yeah.
And
because being disabled changes your mental health. It changes your priority. Let me tell you, it helped in some ways. There were some, I don't ever want to say that depression is self-pity, but there were some of those loops that you fall into that can sort of, you know, and not in like a shaming way, but can sort of fall into self-pity. And it completely changes your priorities when you lose the ability to function the way that you relied on or thought you could.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I got that diagnosis, went into my final year. At this point, it was either the people who liked me were going to accommodate me. The people who didn't know me probably weren't. Oh, well. And, you know, I know that like, I knew there was more to the picture. I didn't have time. And then it was 2020 and I went on spring break to go be a bridesmaid for one of my best friends. And then I just started watching the emails roll in and all the group chats, and finally, you know, never went home again. And the world got really scary for a while. And also I didn't know what my risk factors were because POTS doesn't technically count as immunocompromised. And they're saying like, oh, heart and breathing issues are the triggers, but they're only applying those to people who are overweight. And so I had no idea what my risk factors was. We were terrified. My husband, you know, fiance at the time was so careful. I still managed to get it in November of 2020. So just short of the vaccine being available. And it was terrifying. And then my cat had her first stroke. Rest in peace, Mabel. But she had her first of many strokes in the middle of the night while I was sick with COVID. And I had to call the ER vet and be like, will you please still take her, drop her on the doorstep, run away. You know,
oh my God. This is an enormous stressor at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was so weird is that I graduated thinking my plan before had been, I'm going to take a year, I'm going to tour as many schools as possible, take as many trial lessons as possible, see about grad school, and audition for some small companies and choirs. If somebody wants to pay me before I get more education, cool. If somebody wants to give me money to get an education, cool. And then those opportunities didn't exist anymore.
Right.
So we got engaged instead. And my schedule changed from an extremely demanding full-time student to being at home. I was working from home, never leaving the house. So I didn't realize that I was continuing to decline, because I actually had I had time for hobbies for the first time ever.
Right.
Yeah. So I didn't know how I was doing. It really wasn't until my wedding, which was in October of 2021. I'm glad we didn't, like, we couldn't afford a honeymoon, still haven't had a honeymoon, but I'm glad, because it would have been a complete waste of money. I was catatonic for about the first 2 weeks. I slept 23 hours a day. And my poor husband would just like wait by the bed with a bunch of food and be like, eat something. I would get up, I would shower, I would go back to bed. And I could not move. And then I was still, for the next month, sleeping about 16 to 18 hours a day. So, and you know, and I knew that I was going to crash after the wedding. Like, I did not pace myself. It was my wedding. I was standing all night, like I'm dancing, you know.
Pacing is also about what is worth it, I find.
Right.
You know,
yes.
Like, there are going to the supermarket and doing all of that and then carrying your groceries back home, not worth it. Your wedding day, I get it. Worth it.
Disabled people are excellent at pushing through when we need to. Sometimes to our own detriment. I'm definitely a person who functions in cycles of push and recovery, rather than my occupational therapist is always trying to tell me, like, go to the yellow, don't go to the red. As the following spring of 2022, gigs started opening back up, I was doing some Easter jobs. And I realized I couldn't get through rehearsals with the standing up and sitting down and all of that. And that's when I talked to my GP about getting a rollator.
Great.
And had that, and that made a huge difference, but it was really hard to navigate how to ask for the accommodations I needed. Like, you know, doing gigs at the Symphony Center, we're on Coral Terrace, we're on risers, like, you know, well, we're above the stage, we're in like the seats behind the stage.
Sure.
There's no accessibility whatsoever there. And so I had asked my director, I was like, hey, can I be on the end? Because can I be on the end in the top row? Because that way I'm close to the door. I don't have to walk down the steps. And I'm closest to the tall handrails instead of like the short ones that are like to your knee. And she was like, yeah, sure. And then she put me in the middle, in the first row. And of course I couldn't take my rollator on stage. And then we exited a different way than we entered. So then I didn't have my rollator. And so I was like, hold on, because she didn't tell me we were going to do that until we got to a dress rehearsal, and then everybody left, and I was like, cool. So then I had to go hunt down an employee and be like, can you bring it around? And like all of these things that just no one thought about. You have to be your own everything. But the Ehlers Danlos, I had no idea until about a year. I really thought that I did not meet the criteria. I'm not a typical presentation. I'm extremely stiff. I've got a few bendy joints, like my elbows, some stuff on my thighs. I do not pop out of sockets ever. And it wasn't until last year, about a year ago, I decided I'm just going to dive in. I'm going to go to all the specialists. I'm going to do occupational therapy. I'm going to do all of that. And I had a doctor sit there and go, you know, you don't have to be 100% like this spectrum. Like, you don't have to be able to touch. She's like, this is still substantially past the standard deviation, even if it doesn't touch your wrist. And she was also explaining to me, like, those aren't your joints, your muscles are stiff in order to provide you with stability.
And so that's very common among people with AS, that they're actually stiffer to try to stabilize you.
Yeah, exactly. Which is such a metaphor for my life. So yeah, I'm still kind of learning how to navigate that. One, do you have this issue when you see people, like, because I look at like TikToks of people being like demonstrating all the, you know, bendy joints that are on the criteria checklist. I feel so nauseous. I can't watch them.
Because I had so many of them when I was a kid. We used them as party tricks because they were gross.
Yeah.
Like, I can turn my eyelids inside out. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
Good reason why I can. It's because my eyelids are stretchy. I don't,
Yeah.
I'm not only do I now know that as someone with EDS, I probably shouldn't do that.
Right.
It can cause long-term damage to certain things. If you want to see them because you want to see what this range of motion might look like, or like some of the weirder things, like then like if you're curious, absolutely look. And if you don't, you can just skip the end of the video.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's a reason they're party tricks. It's because they're weird.
Yeah.
They don't look nice.
You don't, yeah. And that's, I think that's part of what made me researching miss out on so many things, because I literally could not watch the content about it. When I get grossed out or squeamish, my thumbs stop working, which is probably an Ehlers-Danlos condition, but then I can't, I can't write, I can't type. And that becomes a problem for anyone, if, so that's just, it's one of those things where I'm like, I'm learning now at 27, 26, when I first got diagnosed, that, and obviously, yes, I know in the grand scheme of things, I'm young, that the rules that I was taught, where I felt the biggest grief, was that everything I was taught as a singer, which is the most important thing in the world to me, that is my identity, that's the core of who I am. The rules that I was taught for technique applied to a body that I will never have. And so everything I tried to learn, and I definitely know we want to talk about this, is like, learning that my whole degree, everyone, every jury form, everything would be like, oh, beautiful tone, whatever. Why are you gasping for air? Can't seem to breathe. I was always told that I just had like horrible breath control. And I was like, I'm not lazy. People are such snobs about breathing. I think you can be an expressive, compelling performer with the breath support of a sparrow. I'm fully.
I mean, obviously, as a lyric, you take a guess at how many Mi Chiamano Mimis I've like listened to in my life. Just take a guess, because it's like twice that. But some of the interesting ones for me is that in the modern recordings, people are always singing like in the big, the big part, the big part. Everybody knows where all the violins are going crazy. That part. All the modern ones, they really want to try to go through all of those lines. But all the old ones breathe sort of wherever, because guess what? Singing is in the sound, guys.
Yeah.
You can make that extra breath also expressive.
Exactly.
Part of the line I created.
Yeah.
And I just breathed more. I add a breath in Come Scoglio near the end in all the coloratura. And I've been complimented on this breath because it sounds cool. I did have to change my technique quite a bit when I discovered how floppy I was, and that I had to add more strength to my entire technical system to be able to accomplish even close to what the next soprano over might be able to in terms of stability and in terms of breath support. Has it improved? Absolutely. But I literally had to like break down everything I had learned about what support was, and start again, because I am so floppy that things will just fall. Like, for example, if I'm lying flat on my bed over there and you can see the palms, the bottoms of my feet, like this foot will fall like the way that normally this foot falls out, and this foot hits the bed. That means my entire hip system is bananas. Well, if I'm building my entire technical apparatus on that hip system, it's flawed from the bottom. So I have to actively be working on strength to be able to have it be stable at all. Too. And like
absolutely,
my technique improved enormously when I did that, which is great and cool for me. But
did you have teachers who helped you figure that out? Did you have to do it more on your own?
I found the right coach for me just for that part of it. Most of my teachers have been very supportive of me. I've been very, very lucky, and they've been able to make specific accommodations about my needs in lessons and all sorts of stuff. They've been really, really supportive. I needed someone who was that focused on the mechanics. And less on the final result of the sound, because the sound was always pretty. So people it didn't matter. Well, it matters to me because I'm
Yeah.
struggling more than the next person over to accomplish half the phrase.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I spent some time with a coach who's based in Italy, so we did it all online, working on what is physically happening in
Yeah.
in
Did you
which
feel
muscles
like
are.
you could get the quality of help you? Because I really struggle with online lessons because I feel like I need to be able to show people exactly what's going on. I know a lot of people are like, we shouldn't be like doing touching, and that's a very personal, very like,
Right.
I understand there's a lot. I have a, I'm good with my own teacher if he's like trying to feel if my back is expanded. There's so much that I can't articulate because I don't know what's abnormal. Do you feel like you were still able to get a good quality of experience and thorough understanding?
I was, because, and this is how I teach as well, is that I think what you really can communicate through this medium are the mechanics. Like there are certain things that with overtones may not be like the entire profile may not be captured on the mic. But if we're not working with the like on the final result sound, and we are working on, I need this muscle to be engaged in this way, and therefore you're gonna go get one of those like 80s butterfly things, put them between your thighs and sit there, and you're gonna sit while you sing with it engaged, so that that whole bottom system is properly engaged. Because it's mechanical, then yes. But I think it was because of the nature of that work that I had to do at that time that it was really still very helpful. And when I'm teaching online, I am often teaching mechanics because a lot of people come to my studio actually having had experiences with other teachers who were a little bit like more. I'm for the podcast listeners, I'm waving my
whatever
fingers
this
like,
means.
About what actually is happening. So they come to me and be like, okay, well, what's happening? And I'm like, well, okay, so this muscle is doing this and this muscle is doing that,
and when your muscles and body, your fascia, when nothing works the way that other people, because my teacher is very technical too. He likes to bring out all the charts and everything and show you everything. The problem is he couldn't help me because I didn't know how to educate him about my specific body. So I don't know, like, I don't understand how people breathe just like normal breathing and make sounds. In order to make a sound, I have to inhale so much that I'm dizzy. I'm a very shallow breather naturally. And so to like my whole life, I was like, I've been taught how to belly breathe. Like I know how to use my diaphragm. And then my occupational therapist was like, no, you don't. You don't. You have heard to use certain muscles. And when another person hears that, they know like their body is incapable of engaging those without engaging everything. You're isolating.
I do believe this is where, particularly when your body is working in one way versus another way, and you don't, as where technique should not be one size fits all. And I like, beautiful singers can come from all types of techniques. Absolutely.
Yes.
Belly breathing is not for me. It destabilizes me. I am a rib breather. I must be, because everything below the rib, I have to be working hard to keep stable. Like I can't move that stuff around. It's got to be where I left it. And then
that's so interesting. That is what I'm being told to work on. I just don't entirely know how to do it. And particularly like, it was like my very last lesson in college where my teacher was like, you don't expand into your back. And I was like, no one told me I was supposed to be doing that. Like,
and because there are so many different like sort of schools of thought, if someone comes to me, because I also like, I direct at an educational operatic space in Vancouver for people who are like curious about opera. Or, like, sometimes they'll come to me and ask me like technique questions just by the fact that I'm the stage director. And the first thing I ask them is like, what type of breathing do you do? Because I'm not about to like break your whole technique system and send you packing. Like, if someone comes to me as a belly breather, I'm like, that's not what I do. And like, if you want to talk about it and totally redo it, that is fine. But that is a totally different question than asking me as a rib breather, how do I sing this entire, how would I sing this entire long phrase if you're a belly breather? Like, it is a big undertaking to reshape your entire technique.
Did you feel a sense of like grief or betrayal because you understood your diagnosis after your education, after starting your career? I know I really struggled with feeling like I had wasted my entire education. Again, that's where I say I'm young in the long run, but I know that I dealt with a lot of anger at the beginning, being like, I was taught how to use a body I didn't have, and I never had a chance. And now that I do not have the built-in support system of this educational framework, and I'm too sick to go back to school, and I haven't been doing anything because it's been COVID, and then I'm like floundering in this weird limbo space with my career. I don't even know how to reteach myself for the body I have now.
Well, I was in a sort of strange educational position because I actually never finished my bachelor's.
Oh,
I know.
Interesting.
I graduated high school a year early, and I got a scholarship to the University of Manitoba to go work with Tracy Dahl, who is one of Canada's most famous coloratura sopranos. She was my teacher. I was like, I will live in Winnipeg if I need to. I want to be because I was a coloratura soprano at the time. She was amazing. She's so technical. She spent there was like a month and a half where she wouldn't let me sing above a G and only had me holding my tongue outside my mouth. She was just like very she worked me very hard and knows so much. I love her. She's great. But my ADHD brain, without any help or knowledge of it being ADHD, I just there was something about it that every part of academia in opera was a struggle for me.
So
I talked to my coach who was back here in Vancouver, and we were like, there's another way to do this, right? Because you don't need a degree to get in places. You just need to be good at this and have lots of experience. So after my first year, I went, and I was also offered Susanna at 18, which sounds bananas, but actually I regret nothing. If you have the technical basis to do it and enough time to study it at that time, hey,
it's not the hardest role. It's just a long one.
It's just long. It's just long. And it teaches you so much, because if you're young and you get the score, it's terrifying, but then you do it. It's great. So I loved it.
And then you can. Yeah.
Exactly. And but I was offered it in August and the show was in May. So I had a lot of time, and I went, I can do that. So I came back to Vancouver and just made it my business to be in everything as much as I could. And because I knew I wasn't going to go back into the educational spaces in that way, I spent some time with coaches who were in, the opera programs around here. But I most of my my long-term coaches were private, just as I worked on repertoire and grew it that way. So I was in a sort of unique position that way. I do feel like I kind of wasted my time in that I built this an enormous resume for coloraturas. Then by the time I was 28, I had to throw it all out.
At least that's something that happens to able-bodied singers often enough.
I did have that, and I was like, I have an enormous number of credits that I cannot use. But some of them I can, I did Musetta, that's fine, you can, you know what I mean, they're but most of them the teachers that I always responded to the best and I always stuck with were the ones who felt like they were making changes for me already, even before I knew what was going on with me. Tracy is, she's also very technical. She's very, and so she heard a thing and went with it, and did not, and was not the sort of person to beat a dead horse if this is not the way that your body is going to work, right? If you know that you have a disabled body and are going in, you're in this particular to a new studio with a new coach. You have the knowledge and tools to say, my body needs these things, because you are the expert on your body, even if you're speaking to the expert on this technical thing.
You have to educate your educators.
Exactly. And if they are not willing to play with that, then they are not the right teacher. They may be a phenomenal teacher for someone else, but they're not the right teacher for you.
It's true.
And there is nothing negative about you if you make the determination that your teacher is not the right teacher for you. I talk about this a lot too with opera companies as well. If an opera company is not willing to make the accommodations that I need to be able to perform with them, then they're not the company for me. And it's their loss, not mine.
Yes, exactly.
And I feel similarly with teachers. But I have been lucky in the sense that my teachers have always been like that. Even the ones who weren't in a position to know that my support system was not going to be as effective as the next person's overs. It was going to be floppy.
Yeah.
Everything about me is floppy. If I turn my head too fast, my entire windpipe clicks.
Yes.
It makes a noise.
I've got that. Yeah.
It is floppy as heck in there.
Yeah.
So even the ones who didn't who had no idea at the time, we're able to make some changes already. So I've been very lucky in that sense. I also, this is also the gift of having a peer group within the opera world that knew about disability and chronic illness long before I knew about it within myself.
Yeah.
I have been so privileged in that, and that is one of the reasons why I talk about it so much on the internet, because
you've seen both sides.
I've seen both sides, and I've been so lucky to never feel as isolated as so many of us do, right? Because I've always had people who at least somewhat understood what I was going through. Yeah. And if I talk about it on the internet, then hopefully others will get to feel the same way, right? Yeah. If we can create spaces where disability in the opera world is not shameful, is not something that you don't talk about, is not something that you don't ask for accommodations about, and it doesn't lose you contracts, because man, can it lose you contracts.
Yeah, for sure.
Then I become not the outlier.
Yeah.
Because I'm very lucky, but I am an outlier. Yeah. I am not. The fact that Opera Mariposa already existed by the time I did all of this, that it already was structured to rehearse with pacing in mind. It's so unique, and it changed the landscape of the opera world in Vancouver, for sure. Yeah. And then expanded and expanded and expanded, and now more people are talking about it, and that's so amazing to me.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So I guess that's a really long way to say no. But
no, it's great. That actually kind of segues perfectly into something I was gonna ask, which is, when it came to the label of disabled, everybody kind of has their own way of describing. Some people prefer to say chronically ill. I think a lot of us go on a journey where we change that. Do you think because of your friend group, how long did it take you to start using that label to describe yourself?
This is a real interesting one. Jackie and I sort of started using it at the same time, despite the fact that she has been disabled since we started taking voice lessons at the same time with the same person when we were 10. Because we went to elementary school together. We grew up together. When I say forever partner in operatic crime, I mean forever. She was just talked about chronic illness, and she talked about it quite publicly. She made entire recitals around sort of storytelling around the story of her illness, and very rarely ever used the word disabled. And it wasn't an avoidance. It just didn't seem to ever occur to her that it was true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it doesn't for a lot of people, because again, as I mentioned earlier, we sort of imagine that disability looks a certain way. Again, I got this little thumbs up.
You're right. We have a very narrow picture. Oftentimes it's people in wheelchairs.
Exactly. And she was
not ambulatory.
Exactly. And she was not a regular wheelchair user. She was on disability in the governmental sense, but it just never occurred to her. Whereas for me, it became an identifier very quickly, honestly. Once I sort of discovered, sort of settled in to my diagnosis, what it meant for me and what my body was actually doing. Because one of the things that my body did that was weird from the age of 16 was essentially put a timer on how long I could be upright.
Yes, for sure.
Specifically because I have we're still sort of investigating it. I don't have a diagnosis, but I appear to have a sort of allergic reaction to standing. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I know. In my feet. There's a sort of hive reaction, and a swelling to being vertical, which is, it sounds like it's not a thing. Apparently it's a thing.
I believe you 100%.
So I, like, very early on in the process of discovering that I was chronically ill, also recognized that I had a mobility issue because I just wasn't able to be upright.
Yeah.
At the same length. I worked in a bookstore. I stopped taking 8-hour shifts by the time I was 16 because I could not. So because there was always a sort of a direct line here, and because we had immediately discovered upon my diagnosis that meant that everybody within the Mariposa system was disabled, we went with the word for Mariposa, and therefore I went with the word for me.
Wow. Well, that I imagine it's really helpful to have that community built in.
It is. And that's, like, this is why I feel so passionately about talking about it on the internet, because here's the thing. I am part of the LGBTQ plus community. So people assume that because my partner is also a man, just because that makes me not bisexual anymore. No, not how many of that. There is a coming out process as a queer person. But in the opera world, it is easier to come out as queer than it can be to come out as disabled.
Woo, that's a hard pill to swallow, but that is,
but it's true,
definitely true.
There's a long tradition of out queer folks like me in
opera's gay as hell. Always has been.
It always has been in opera, and like that doesn't say that there aren't barriers and there aren't people who are not great about it. There are, but
I know particularly my friends who have trans experience, like that's gender nonconformity and still hormone issues, like that's hard, even though we're cross-dressing half the time in opera.
I know.
that is hard. It's like sexuality is fine. Once you start messing with gender, everyone's confused. Disability,
pearl clutching.
Yes.
But so like there's still a long way to go in opera for
sure.
LGBTQ plus people. But for me, at any rate, it was definitely harder to say disabled. That said, I had this community. I had this opera company that had been successfully making, small indie opera, but successfully making it for years and was respected. And I knew at that point that my career was going to be different, and I had already started building its systems in a way that would be more accessible for me, and that that in that system that I had created, I would not lose contracts that would negatively affect my career or my the pocketbook at the end of the day. And I might lose some, but I would be able to live without it. And that is a very rare situation in the opera world. I'm in an incredibly rare position to be able to do that.
It gives me hope, though, like, as somebody who feels like I know that I haven't, but I feel like I've wasted the last 4 years of my life.
You have not.
And
you learned.
And it's I'm trying. It was so refreshing to see that not only were you a trained opera singer who had Ehlers Danlos, you're working. You're currently working, and it's possible. And I think I needed to see that. And it's funny that you mentioned like your partner in crime who didn't use the word disabled. That was exactly how it was for me. It didn't occur to me. I remember I was doing a therapy intake session. And the woman who was doing the intake was asking me questions, and I went into like the health issues, and she was like, so do you identify as disabled? At that point, I just had the POTS diagnosis, and I was like, oh, I mean, I guess I am.
But we all at Mariposa just sort of started identifying as disabled at the same time.
I think it's important. I think obviously people can identify however they are comfortable, whatever resonates.
Of course.
But I do think it's powerful to reclaim that. And I don't know that it came naturally to me until I started using mobility aids, because at that point, then it's kind of like, well, there's no point in not saying it anymore. Now people are going to say it for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I totally feel that. I believe you were also like a sometimes mobility aid user. Like, yeah, it
My
depends on the time.
rollator lives in my car,
Right.
and I live in a 4-floor walk up. I did not know. See, I was not diagnosed with anything when I moved in here.
Oh,
I thought at
right.
the time I was out of shape, and I was like, this will be so great for me.
The
So
way that
I'm
I have
trying.
passed out on my 6th floor walk up in Frankfurt, passed out
Oh,
on the stairs on the way
yeah.
up.
I just
With
don't leave the house. I genuinely, honestly, I leave the house every 10 to 12 days.
right.
And when
Right.
my family hears that, they're shocked. Like, they're like, how do you live? And I'm like, it's not, I'm hoping it's not forever, but yeah, now my own house, I don't really need anything. I know where everything
Yeah.
is. I'll use like a cane in a restaurant if I don't have to walk from like a
Right.
large parking lot and something, where you just don't want the clunkiness. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is ambulatory, but I try
Right.
to be seen with it in public, even on the days where you're not totally sure, because when the crash hits, you might not have time. And so it's
Absolutely.
like,
There are days when
yeah,
I'm like, I'm feeling hot. I'm not going far. Do I need this cane? And then I'm like, but I won't know that for
you'll
later.
regret it later.
If I don't take it, I'll be upset. You and I are both people who, generally have fairly invisible disabilities, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we just sort of were,
Yeah.
someone took a photo of us, they might never know.
Yes.
Using a mobility aid makes it more visible. And of course, people, like, it doesn't change the way that your body looks. People will make all sorts of
It has made my life
wildly
easier.
ableist assumptions, but
Mm-hmm.
it does increase the visibility
Yes.
of your disability. And I like to be seen with it, not only to make sure that people remember, but I also love that because I am in this very rare situation, I get to be operatic representation for disabled people.
That's
when there
wonderful.
is so little.
Yes.
For the people who are watching, I brought one of my canes out.
Yes. Is
I
this
have
a sparkly one? You have
yes,
2 sparkly ones, right?
I have 4.
Oh my
They're
goodness.
all sparkly.
I love
The
that.
advantage I find to a mobility aid that is sparkly, is that if I say to like if I have a concert gig, it just matches my outfit. It's just
Yeah, I have a few that I change out for my outfits.
that
Yeah.
are like, but also if I love my mobility aid, I am more likely to use it when I need it.
True.
So
True.
I have 4 different ones that match different outfits.
Mm-hmm.
Today I am wearing sky blue, so the cane that comes with it is this ice blue to ombre.
I stalked the website of the person who made those because I was like, I need it so much.
I know. They're working on having an online store. Currently,
Okay.
it's mostly wholesale. I'm gonna contact them about getting like a discount code for people, because people talk about it.
I would love
all
that.
the time. These things are not just helpful. This doesn't just help me get around.
Those things are freedom.
Joyful.
Yes.
It is so, there's something so joyful about it. When I walk around outside, people look at me and they look at my young ass looking face. I am 32. I have like 3 wrinkles.
You do look young.
Thank you, Ehlers Danlos syndrome.
You said like a while ago, you're like 15 years ago. And I was like, when you were what, 5?
Yeah, no, I am 32. I have aged out of most young artist programs, like, significantly. But they look at me and they look at my young ass face. And then they look down at, so like, these are just people walking down the street. And then they look down at my cane, and I love this because I see this rotation of ideas. They go first, they go sad, then they go sparkly. Is cane cool? Are canes cool? Are canes cool now? That's amazing. I see this entire rotation and I love it. I love that I can watch people challenge their own internalized ableism in real time, looking at my cane.
Yes. Most people are complimentary. Like, people are nicer than we give them credit. I've definitely gotten, especially old people, on planes usually, because I get early boarding and everything, where, I'll check my rollator at the gate. I'll use a cane to get down the aisle. And I remember this old guy like sitting next to me, and he was like, "What's that? You use that to keep your husband in line?" And it's just one of those situations where it's like, if you were curious, just ask.
Yes.
If you are looking at, because I can feel you going, what's wrong with her?
Yes.
Just ask. It's not a bad word. It's not like, I'm happy to tell you.
Right.
Or don't say anything at all. And I think, you have to be respectful. Those are extensions of our body. I remember, I was at my baby sister's graduation in May. My family was taking photos. They always assume I want my rollator out of the photos. And sometimes I do. Sometimes I want to show off the fit. Sometimes it's fine. And, if I'm just standing and have my arm around somebody, I can do that. But, I do want to, I've tried to be conscious about like putting photos of my rollator on my Instagram lately, just for that purpose, to normalize it. But I remember as we were getting ready to take the photos, everyone started putting their purses and stuff on my rollator, and they just and I just remember, I'm glad I did this, because I don't think I usually would have. I think I usually would have just kept quiet, and I just said, hey, that's my body, you need to ask. And I didn't have a problem with it.
Right, but you need to ask first.
Yes, I'm happy. I have pushed intoxicated friends in my own walker. I will carry your stuff for you, but you have to ask, because that's weird. That is my tool for freedom. And that's the thing that I have to internalize, is like, it feels like such a blow to be a young person and have a mobility aid and sit there and you can play these mind games where it feels like I've solidified there's a sense of permanence in my disability once I've surrendered to that. And I have to remember, that is my tool for freedom. That allows me to engage with the world.
Yeah. And like, one of the things that I'm getting from these absolutely joyful canes is that that when they are this sparkly and this so clearly joyful, I am more likely to have that sort of more positive conversation with people. Where I get, I love your cane.
Yes.
They're less likely to assume it shouldn't be in the photo, because I am so clearly actively celebrating this.
Yeah.
It gives other people more permission to celebrate it, or, shut up about it if they're still feeling weird about it and challenging their own ableism. I've been very lucky. And even like the old folks who occasionally are like, who clearly want to press a little bit because I am young, then they look at the cane and they go, where did you get it?
I love those. I love those conversations.
Like the number of people who I have watched, again, have the conversation with themselves in real time about, should I be using a cane? It looks so cool. Does that mean, does it give them permission to use the thing that would help them I tell
everyone, I tell, especially like for airports and things. I met a woman who had nerve damage, and so it wasn't entirely applicable, but she was saying that she gets challenged about having disability accommodations at the airport or at venues. And I was like, honestly, I would love to educate everybody, but you and I both know energy is precious and you can't do that all the time. Get a cane, because people shut up. Like, I just honestly, I think everybody should. It's just a good thing. You can get one that folds up. Like, because it just helps.
It helps people process that just because you're like a young doesn't mean that you are immune from having health issues.
And once it happens to you, you will see them everywhere. Like, I honestly, I didn't see it. And then once I had it, I'm like noticing all the walkers and canes and everything.
My favorite is the like sup motion you get when you cross someone else who's using a mobility aid on the street.
Yes, I was at Summerfest. I was seeing Ethel Kane over the weekend, and as the crowd is funneling in, there was another woman who had the same rollator as me, and I was doing the same thing where I walked past. I was like, twin.
I love it. Like, again, the internalized ableism that we've all been taught, that every single one of us has been taught, and every single one of us is should be working through.
Yes.
Tells us that it is giving up to use a mobility aid. It does. It tells you that you're like not working as hard, or that something sad has happened.
Which is ridiculous, because existence shouldn't be hard.
Exactly. Like no, every part of my mobility aid is joyful to me. And I love being able to communicate that with a sparkly cane. I get to tell the world that this is joy. I get to tell the world that this is freedom, that this is not me giving up on anything or myself. It is me accessorizing to the fullest extent and looking fabulous while having stability and more stamina and being able to keep up with people.
And you know what? These experiences, they help in the storytelling.
Yeah.
We need diverse storytellers who have a depth of complicated experiences and emotions, because if you go through life and everything's hoity-toity, everything's all good, how are you going to convey the depth of these storylines where people are throwing themselves off bridges and cheating on their husbands and you need the diverse perspective.
Exactly. I am the voice type of the women who die of tuberculosis in opera.
I know, and I'm so jealous.
And like, I have never had tuberculosis. All right. I have never had a disability that was also terminal, but I am a disabled person, and I can come to those characters with the conscious awareness that these are not just romance stories. These are disability stories inherently. Do you know how much more those arias make sense when you see them through a disability lens? Mimi is not just staring at the window about how beautiful the city is when she's alone, and that it's the only thing that it belongs to her. In her isolation as a disabled woman, to have the beauty of that sunrise is so like it fills her heart in that moment. As an isolated disabled person, now she is real. Now we understand this moment, and she doesn't just stand there in soprano pose looking concerned, which is what often ends up happening.
Yeah.
You get
we're all guilty of it.
Right?
Yeah.
We're all and like, it is true. Every acting singer is still going to occasionally in opera just sort of leave their face somewhere and think about the music for a while and then come back to it. It's opera. That okay, fine, whatever. But the stories themselves on the broader macro level are disability stories, and they are richer for that. True.
Very true. And we're richer for being in the industry.
Absolutely. So,
yeah. As we're wrapping up, I just wanted just summarize for any smaller companies out there, anyone who's thinking of it, what you've already employed with Mariposa. What are some of the few things that you think companies and organizations can do to be more inclusive and accessible for disabled performers?
Awesome. I love this question. Here's why. Because people often imagine that being accessible for disabled performers, by its very nature, means an enormous amount of money and effort and time. And like, yes, there are lots of improvements that you can make with lots of more money and effort and time, but this is the arts, and we recognize that things take time. The other thing that we recognize is that accessibility is not a one and done phenomenon. It is not a thing that you can just say, we have completed it and it's over now. It should always be an evolution. So giving small companies in particular like permission to go to say, we're not, like we can't reinvent our entire wheel right now. What we can do is this, and that we can do right now. Give yourself permission to do it a few things at a time. Do we want all of these companies to be as accessible as possible? Yes. But remember that involves the phrase "as possible."
Right.
Small opera companies, at least here, are often renting theaters. They're not, they don't have a home theater. So a small opera company can't, build a ramp into this theater. They can't, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They can do their best to select theaters that already have access measures and plan for them longer in advance. That you can do. For example, there's a theater here in town that is accessible from the audience, but not from the back. This is really common,
a common occurrence. Yeah,
because they forget that disabled performers exist.
Right.
But
exactly.
We do. We're here. Hello. So you plan when you have disabled cast members, because it's not an if, it's a when. That those folks are going to need to come in through that area. They may be blocking. Their blocking may be different so that they enter through that area. There are ways to make it more accessible that don't involve building a ramp for this theater that you don't own.
Yeah.
Here is my number 100% tip. And unfortunately, there are now bans emerging on this. But it's so cheap and so easy to make an operatic space more accessible if there is more masking in it. Because remember that immunocompromisation is disability. Making spaces COVID safer makes them more accessible. And I recognize that there are operas that a human can't sing with a mask on. And I recognize that there are singers who can't sing with a mask on. For example, being a singer with asthma makes singing with a mask inaccessible.
I do have asthma. It was hard. You inhale so much of the mask.
Yeah, like but the people around you can be masking more. There can be more testing requirements. And you know how cheap that is? That is the cheapest way to make your space more accessible. And there is no threshold. Every mask improves that space.
Yeah.
Every single one, every time it's worn. So if we have a little bit more masking in rehearsals, if we have a little bit more masking in backstage areas, you know how easy that is?
That is such a good point. And Americans really need to listen.
And like, I recognize that we are currently experiencing literal mask bans where they are literally saying the quiet part out loud. They are literally saying that the justification is that immunocompromised people shouldn't be in public spaces. I am not kidding. I've seen it written.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah.
It's unhinged, but whatever. Okay. I recognize that there are places where that can be done. But if we imagine things within that context, if we imagine ways to make opera more accessible as small, easy, little activities that we can do, opera becomes more accessible, period.
Yeah.
Period. I have these little, and I talk about them on Instagram sometimes too, these little like clip-on air purifiers. They're itty bitty.
Yes, I've seen those. Yeah.
They're cute. You can get them in all different colors. And the way that I can clip it onto my, my belt in a rehearsal and just walk around like that.
That's wonderful. That's such a good idea.
Right? Like there are small changes that small opera companies can make to make themselves more accessible, that don't break the bank, that don't change the entire system right now. And yes, we would love these things to escalate. We would love it all to be more accessible. We would love it not to be normal that the theater is accessible from the audience, but not the back. I'd love for that not to be a thing.
Right.
The small opera companies very often can't do anything about that. So what else can we do? What changes can we make to our everyday behavior that make this opera more accessible? Hiring covers. I mean, yeah, that can break the bank depending on the opera and the opera company. But in and of itself, like, it protects the opera company enormously. If you have a standing, like one of the standing air purifiers going in your rehearsal, great. Yeah. Awesome. I've recently put one in, I directed a Pirates of Penzance this year. There was one going through the entire show in the pit. And for the ceiling.
That's really smart. The
yeah, like everybody starts testing, because I can't always as a stage director, because COVID protections are often sort of gray area for opera companies. I find who is in charge of that. Is the person who's in charge of the production in charge of that, or is the opera company in charge of that?
Right, that makes sense.
So there are certain things that I can ask for and certain things that I can't, right? As a director, if I'm coming into an opera company, in the productions where I can say this, I say, we're going to start testing very early, before the masks come off. If you must sing with your, like, like for Pirates, there's not a ton of very difficult singing that must be done with a mask off in that. There really isn't. No. Most people spent the entire rehearsal process masked. The people who couldn't for their singing were testing regularly before that. They took it off for the aria or whatever, and then they put it back on. Like, it's just, it's just not hard. And then we have, a negative test requirement, because a test, a single test is far less effective than tests 48 hours apart.
Yes.
Those are much more effective. Sure. All of these are actually access issues. We do not imagine them as access issues, and they are. Yeah. The other things that are I think are really easy is, I have heard of a person who lost their contract, like a contracted position as a chorister, one of the largest opera companies in Canada, because she started needing to use a cane, and they said that a cane was not period appropriate.
So what period? When have there not? When have there not been canes?
Please explain. Well, like, no. So if we start imagining that people on stage may be using mobility aids, then we can start imagining adding them to costumes. Like there are ways that we can do it on a micro level that have macro effects.
And have fun with it. God, my husband loves pushing me when I need to, because my rollator converts into a transport chair. Awesome. And even, you know, my teacher, he said, like, whenever you're coming back, whenever you're ready, he's like, I can't wait to put that thing into shows. He's like, can I like slide you onto the stage? Like, I mean, within safety, but like embrace it, because you're right. If you can do a funny trick with it, I know very few disabled people who don't have a sense of humor about their disability.
Oh, I love it. I this season I did Miss Pinkerton in The Old Maid and the Thief, which was a super fun role, super small, but like she's a hoot. She's just, you know, she's very high strung. And there's a part where she sings, "Keep all the doors locked, keep all the windows closed." And I like when I did the keep all the windows closed part, I held my cane to myself and like shook.
That's perfect.
It was so funny. It can be funny. It can be a joy, like a sparkly cane is joyful. It can be a prop.
Yes, absolutely.
So I think it's really just imagining things differently at the micro level.
Yeah.
That the small companies can do.
Yeah.
And if you do imagine it as a forever process, something that you were always thinking about, as opposed to a thing that you finish and are done. Congratulations, look, our opera company is ADA compliant and we never have to think about it again. No. Then you can make it significantly more accessible.
Right.
Without ever having to build that ramp, though we would like to build the ramp. You know what I mean? Like,
yes.
You create new ideas and you build it in without trying to take it out.
Yes. Oh, good job. Yes.
I also love hiding, like as a director, I love hiding like water around the stage for my cast members.
Oh, that's really smart.
Yeah, like letting people hydrate. Like I directed Hansel and Gretel, just closed. Well, like you bet that some of the candy that they were literally eating were like energy bars, and if they were able to sing with that, because I had a couple singers who could not continue to sing after eating, well then they're gonna have the big cardboard candies that they're gonna play with. Like that's fine.
Yes.
Not cardboard, they were wood and really well made, but you know, but they're also like bottles that are colored like they're sugar water. They're not.
Yeah.
They're water.
They're just water. Yeah.
Hansel and Gretel are on stage for the entire second half of that opera.
It's true. Like, yeah.
You should get a chance to drink. Like there are ways to make it everything more doable to everyone for every purpose. You
just have to make the effort.
Exactly.
People don't want to make effort.
Because big full circle moment, because there is this pressure in the operatic world to appear like your body is perfect. And because it is hard to come out as having a disability or even like an injury in opera, people do not tell the companies that they work with about their needs because they feel the need to hide them. If you put into your ethos a problem-solving solution, like mindset, like how do we make sure that this works, and we do it from the beginning so that it's fun and cool and we don't have to make a whole thing about it, then people are more likely to feel safe enough to ask for the things they need. You become a safe space that also just makes really cool operas.
I could listen to you talk all day. This is great. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you have any feedback, you can reach us at dissonantdialogues@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 872-216-9032 with feedback. If you want to be a guest like we had today, topic ideas or questions, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok. Those are both at Dissonant Dialogues. You've got your YouTube channel and Instagram. Do you want to plug those?
My YouTube channel is youtube.com/RobinHahn. It's soprano without the O. It's in German and it rhymes. Easy to remember. I talk about opera, disability, queerness, cats, and tea. On Instagram, the same handle, Robin Hahn Soprano.
Thank you so much for coming on here. This has been wonderful.
It's been a joy. I'm pretty sure you and I could talk about this forever.
I've fallen and I can't get up.
Those are the
Yes.
options. Oh, I got the balloon thing. I don't know how to turn. Revolting. It's revolting outside. Hypermolar, my itty bitty little muscles doing these little itty bitty things. And yeah, but I don't wanna. This thing really loves my face. The first one, and once again, I get the balloons. You know when you have POTS and sometimes there's no blood in your head for no reason. Got it. Just happy to be there all the time. As I said, it's quite obnoxious. And
anyway, here's your diploma. Goodbye.
My entire hip system is bananas.
That's probably going to get clipped.